My name is Caroline Mercer. I'm 42 years old. At 6:28 on a Saturday evening, while my parents stood beneath a floral arch at my sister's Vow Renewal in Charleston, clapping as if love had just been invented in their honor, I was lying unconscious in a trauma room 90 miles away with blood in my hair, a fractured rib, and a ventilator breathing for me. My mother had received the call at 4:11. My father had received the second call at 4:23. The hospital had told them the words no parent should be able to misunderstand: car accident, severe bleeding, emergency surgery, critical condition. My sister, Heather, was renewing her vows at a waterfront estate with 200 guests, a string quartet, and a champagne tower that cost more than my first car. My mother told the nurse, "We are in the middle of a family ceremony. We'll come as soon as we can." My father said, "Caroline is strong. She'll pull through." Then they turned off their phones. I know this because everything was documented. What they didn't know was that 3 weeks before the accident, my attorney had already filed the paperwork activating the $10 million Mercer Family Protection Trust. They didn't know my grandmother had named me sole controlling trustee if my parents ever attempted to misuse family assets, abandon a beneficiary in medical crisis, or transfer trust power to my sister. They didn't know the hospital calls, the voicemails, the unanswered messages, and the time-stamped photos from Heather's vow renewal would become evidence. And they certainly didn't know that when they finally arrived at the hospital the next morning smelling like champagne and gardenias, they no longer had access to a single dollar they thought they controlled. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I was in a coma. But my lawyer could speak. Before I tell you how my parents chose a second wedding over their daughter's first chance to live, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. If you've ever watched a family protect the favorite child while expecting the responsible one to survive quietly, like this video, subscribe, and stay with me. This is that story. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, in a brick house on Ellison Square, with white columns, polished floors, and silence in every room that mattered. My father, Richard Mercer, was a financial advisor with a silver watch, a careful smile, and a gift for making selfishness sound like discipline. He was 68 when everything happened, though he had spent most of his life trying to look 55. My mother, Vivian Mercer, was 65, a former charity board president who knew how to arrange flowers, seating charts, and public sympathy with equal precision. My younger sister, Heather Mercer Callahan, was 38, and my parents treated her life as a weather system the rest of us were expected to orbit. Heather was beautiful in a fragile, expensive way. Pale blonde hair, perfect skin, a laugh that arrived just loudly enough for people across a room to notice. She married Grant Callahan, a commercial developer from Charleston, when she was 26, in a wedding my mother described for years as the proudest day of our lives. Not one of the proudest, the proudest. I was 30 then, standing beside Heather in a dusty rose bridesmaid dress while my mother adjusted her veil and whispered, "Don't let Caroline hold the bouquet too high in the photos. She blocks Heather's neckline." That was my family in one sentence. I was not unloved exactly. I was relied upon. There is a difference, and children feel it before they have words for it. Heather was the daughter my mother displayed. I was the daughter my parents called when something needed fixing. When I was 13, Heather failed 8th grade math. My father hired a private tutor and told everyone the teacher had, quote, failed to understand Heather's learning style. When I came home with a 91 in geometry, he circled the missing points in red pen and said, "You're too smart to be careless." When I was 17, Heather backed my mother's Mercedes into the garage wall. My father said, "Accidents happen." When I scraped the bumper of my old Toyota in a grocery store parking lot at 21, he made me pay for the repair and said, "Responsibility has to cost something." When I was 28, I was promoted to Senior Trust Operations Manager at a private wealth firm. My mother took me to lunch at 1 o'clock at the Pearl Room. Before dessert arrived, Heather called crying because the florist for her engagement party had ordered ivory roses instead of white ones. My mother stood from the table and said, "I'm so sorry, darling, your sister is falling apart." I sat alone with 2 untouched creme brulees and the check. By the time I was 35, I had learned to stop expecting celebration. Expectation is heavy. Competence is easier to carry. I became a trust attorney eventually, though I started in operations. I loved the quiet architecture of fiduciary law. The way words on paper could protect someone long after their voice was gone. The way a properly drafted clause could stand in a doorway and say no. My colleagues called me precise. My clients called me calm. My parents called me difficult whenever my precision did not benefit them. The only person in my family who truly saw me was my grandmother, Eleanor Mercer. She was my father's mother, a small woman with white hair, sharp blue eyes, and a walking cane she used more for punctuation than support. She had inherited money from her second husband and multiplied it through real estate investments before anyone in our family knew enough to appreciate her. She lived in a restored townhouse near Forsyth Park and wore lipstick even when no one visited. Grandmother Eleanor did not tolerate Heather's performances. When Heather was 24 and cried at Thanksgiving because the pumpkin pie was too rustic, my grandmother looked at her and said, "Child, if pie can injure you, life will finish the job." Heather avoided her for 3 months. I adored her. Every Thursday at 6, I visited my grandmother with takeout from a Vietnamese place she pretended not to like and always finished. We talked about law, books, money, and the strange ways families hide transactions inside affection. One evening when I was 36, she said, "Caroline, your parents do not understand stewardship." I was unpacking spring rolls at her kitchen island. "Of money?" I asked. "Of anything. Money, love, duty. You give them something, and they confuse possession with ownership." I stopped moving. She tapped her cane once against the tile. "That house they live in? The investment accounts? The family foundation? They think those things belong to them because I have allowed them to manage pieces while I'm alive." I said, "Don't tell Dad that. He'll print business cards." She smiled, then her face grew serious. "I need someone who knows the difference between control and care." That was the first time she mentioned the Mercer Family Protection Trust. It had been created after my grandfather died. The trust held real estate, investment accounts, insurance assets, and proceeds from the sale of commercial properties. Its value moved with markets, but by the time I learned the details, it was a little over $10 million. My father served as administrative co-trustee for some accounts while my grandmother was living, mostly because she believed giving him responsibility might teach him humility. It did not. My mother treated the trust like a family prestige machine. Heather treated it like a soft guarantee that consequences would never become too sharp. My grandmother had watched long enough. She wanted me named successor controlling trustee under specific conditions. If my father misused funds, attempted unauthorized transfers, neglected medical duty toward a covered family beneficiary, or tried to redirect trust assets to Heather without documented need, I could petition for immediate activation. If my parents abandoned a beneficiary during a medical emergency while acting as emergency contacts or fiduciary agents, the trust could shift control automatically pending review. I remember staring at her across the kitchen. "Grandmother," I said, "that is very specific." She dipped a spring roll into sauce. "Specificity is how women survive men who call themselves practical." I nearly laughed. She did not. Then she said, "Your father will choose appearances over obligations if forced. Your mother will help him make it look tasteful. Heather will stand beside them and cry. I need the papers ready before they prove me right." I did not want her to be right. That was my flaw, for longer than I liked to admit. I mistook accurate fear for bitterness because accepting the truth would require grieving a family I still wanted. Grandmother Eleanor died 2 years later, at 8:40 on a Monday morning in March. I was holding her hand when she took her last breath. My father was in Atlanta, at a finance conference. My mother was at a luncheon. Heather was getting highlights. The funeral was elegant. My mother made sure of that. White lilies, black dresses, silver-framed photos. My father gave a speech about legacy and stewardship that made my jaw ache from holding still. After the service, Heather complained that grandmother had left her only jewelry and not direct cash. "She knew I don't wear yellow gold," Heather said in the church reception hall, holding a plate of tea sandwiches. I looked at the sapphire ring on her finger that grandmother had worn for 40 years. "Then sell it," I said. Heather blinked. "That's cruel." "No," I said. "Cruel would be pretending you loved the woman more than the metal." My mother heard and pulled me aside near the guest book. "Caroline, must you always sharpen everything?" "I'm tired." "We all are." "No," I said. "Some of us were present." Her face hardened. From that day forward, the trust became a shadow in the family. My father assumed he controlled it. My mother assumed she could influence it. Heather assumed it would rescue her whenever Grant's business projects became unstable, which happened more often than their Instagram photos suggested. I said very little. Silence, in my family, had always been expected of me. They never realized I had learned to use it. 3 years after my grandmother's death, Heather announced that she and Grant were renewing their vows for their 12th anniversary. Not a dinner. Not a quiet ceremony. A full weekend event in Charleston at a waterfront estate called Larkspur House. My mother called me at 7:16 on a Tuesday evening. "Caroline," she said, breathless, "Heather and Grant are doing something beautiful for their marriage." "Are they separating?" "What? No." "Then why does their marriage need a production?" My mother sighed. "Please don't start." I was in my office reviewing a trust dispute involving siblings who were somehow less exhausting than my own. "What are they doing?" I asked. "A vow renewal. June 18th, Larkspur House. Very tasteful. Very expensive. Grant has had a difficult year. This will be healing for them." Grant's difficult year involved a failed condominium deal, 2 liens, and a rumor that he had been photographed at a hotel bar with a woman who was not my sister. Heather's solution apparently was a second wedding. My father joined the call. "We'd like you to attend with a good attitude." I leaned back in my chair. "That sounds like 2 invitations." "Caroline," he said, "I'll check my calendar." My mother said, "This matters to Heather." I looked at the framed photo of my grandmother on my bookshelf. "I know," I said. "Everything does." The vow renewal planning consumed them. Heather chose a custom ivory gown. My mother booked floral installations. My father arranged private transportation for guests. There was a rehearsal dinner, a welcome brunch, a string quartet, a photographer, a videographer, a champagne tower, engraved vow books, and a live painter. The budget passed $180,000 before anyone admitted there was a budget. I learned that by accident during a trust review call on May 23rd. My father requested a liquidity movement from one of the family accounts, citing, quote, "legacy family event obligations." The request crossed my desk because, after my grandmother's death, I had become outside compliance counsel for the trust protector. He did not know that part. The trustee records listed Mercer Family Protection Trust disbursement request, $125,000, recipient Larkspur House events. I stared at the screen. My grandmother's voice returned. "Possession with ownership." I called my attorney and colleague Abigail Ross at 3:12. Abigail was 51, direct, dry, and impossible to intimidate. She had been my mentor before becoming the attorney who helped me maintain the trust activation file after my grandmother's death. "We may have a problem," I said. "With your father or with people generally?" "My father." "Then we definitely have a problem." I sent her the disbursement request. She called back at 3:28. "Is your sister ill, homeless, in legal distress?" "No renewing vows." "With trust money?" "That appears to be the attempt." Abigail was silent for 3 seconds. Then she said, "Your grandmother would rise from the grave and audit him herself." "I know." "This may qualify as attempted misuse." "I know." "Do you want to activate?" I looked at the request again. If I acted, the family would explode. My father would accuse me of betrayal. My mother would say I had humiliated them. Heather would cry about sabotage. I had spent my entire life being the one who did not ruin the moment. But money meant for protection was being pointed at a champagne tower. I said, "Prepare the petition." That was the moment I stopped being the daughter who kept the peace and started becoming the trustee my grandmother had chosen. I built it in silence. On May 26, Abigail filed preliminary notice with the trust protector and court liaison. On June 1st, the disbursement request was frozen pending review. My father called me at 8 o'clock that night. "Did you interfere with a trust transfer?" he asked, no greeting. "I reviewed a questionable disbursement." "You had no right." "I had every right." "That money is for family benefit. A vow renewal is not an emergency." He exhaled sharply. "Your bitterness toward Heather is becoming pathological." My fiduciary concern is not bitterness. Don't hide behind legal language. Don't hide a party inside a trust request. He went quiet. Then he said, "You have always resented that Heather brings joy to this family." I looked around my apartment. Bookshelves, case files, a cup of tea going cold beside my laptop, a life built without asking him for applause. "No," I said. "I resent that everyone else has to finance it." My mother called 10 minutes later. "Caroline, your sister is sobbing." "I'm sorry she's upset. This renewal is about saving her marriage." "Then Grant should pay for it. You know his liquidity is complicated right now." "Most people call that broke." "Why are you being ugly?" "I'm being accurate. She needs us." "So did grandmother's trust beneficiaries. That's why the money exists." My mother's voice lowered. "You are not the head of this family." "No," I said, "but I may be the only person reading the documents." She hung up. For the next 2 weeks, my family froze me out. That was not punishment. It was relief. I worked, met with Abigail, reviewed trust clauses, and prepared for the activation hearing scheduled for June 21st, 3 days after Heather's vow renewal. The freeze on the disbursement held. Somehow, Heather's event continued anyway, funded by credit cards, Grant's parents and my parents' personal funds. I received one text from Heather on June 10th at 11:22 at night. "You have always hated seeing me happy." I replied at 6:30 the next morning. "I hope your marriage becomes stronger than your centerpiece budget." She did not answer. Then came June 18th. I was supposed to drive to Charleston that morning. I had even packed a navy dress, though I had not decided whether wearing it would feel like maturity or self-erasure. The vow renewal began at 6 in the evening. Guests were told to arrive at 5:15 for garden cocktails. My parents had gone down 2 days early. Heather had posted 9 photos before noon. At 2:46 in the afternoon, I left Savannah in my silver sedan with a garment bag hanging in the back seat. At 3:38, a delivery truck ran a red light on a wet intersection outside Beaufort. I remember the sound before impact. Tires screaming. Metal folding. Glass becoming rain. Then nothing. A fisherman named Paul Dempsey called emergency services at 3:40. Paramedics arrived at 3:47. I was unconscious, bleeding heavily from a scalp wound, with internal injuries and a dropping blood pressure. They cut me out of the car at 4:02 and transported me to St. Anne's Regional Trauma Center. My phone survived in the floorboard. At 4:11, the hospital called my mother because she was listed as my first emergency contact from an old form I had never updated. She answered in the bridal suite at Larkspur House while Heather's makeup artist was applying setting spray. The nurse, Kelly Tran, documented the call. Adult daughter involved in severe motor vehicle accident. Patient unconscious. Emergency surgery likely. Family requested at hospital immediately. My mother said, "We are in Charleston at a family ceremony. Is she awake?" The nurse said no. My mother said, "Is she going to die before tomorrow?" The nurse said, "Ma'am, she is critical. You should come now." My mother said, "We'll come as soon as we can." At 4:23, the hospital called my father. He was with Grant near the waterfront lawn, helping the photographer arrange family portraits. He said, "Caroline is strong, she'll pull through, keep us updated." The nurse said, "Sir, she is being taken into surgery." My father said, "Text the details to my wife, we're about to start." At 4:30, my mother texted me, "Honey, we heard. Doctors are taking care of you. We will come after the ceremony. Be strong." I was unconscious. At 5:15, guests arrived at Larkspur House. At 5:40, Heather took portraits under Spanish moss. At 6:28, my parents stood and clapped as Heather and Grant renewed vows they had already made once and barely honored since. At 6:31, I went into surgery. At 7:14, Heather posted a photo of my parents kissing her cheeks with the caption, "My whole heart is here." My whole heart was 90 miles away, open on an operating table. I woke 3 days later. Not all at once. Waking from a coma is not like movies. There is no clean gasp, no dramatic line, no immediate understanding. There were lights, pain, pressure, tubes, voices, and a terror so basic it had no language. Melissa, my assistant at the firm, was the first face I recognized. Her eyes were red, her hair was pulled into a messy knot. She had a legal pad in her lap because even in crisis she knew who I was. "Caroline," she whispered, "you're safe." Safe is a complicated word in a hospital bed. I tried to speak, my throat refused. She touched my hand. "Don't, you were in an accident, you had surgery, you're in Savannah, Abigail is handling everything." Abigail. The name reached a part of me that still knew structure. My parents came in later that afternoon. My mother wore beige linen and pearls. My father wore the same navy jacket from the Vow Renewal photos. I remember that. Not because clothes matter, but because they had changed out of crisis and into presentation before coming to my bedside. My mother cried when she saw me. "Oh, Caroline," she said, pressing a tissue to her mouth. "We were so frightened." I could not answer. My father stood at the foot of the bed. "You scared us, kiddo," he said. Kiddo. At 42, with stitches in my scalp. Heather appeared behind them holding a vase of white roses. She whispered, "I came as soon as I could." Later, I learned that meant after her farewell brunch. I looked at them. The three of them. Tanned from Charleston sun. My mother's manicure perfect. Heather's wrist, still stacked with Vow Renewal bracelets. My father checking his phone between sentences. I could not speak, but I could see. Seeing was enough. Abigail arrived at 4:10, wearing a black suit and the expression of a woman who had not slept but had won every argument anyway. She asked everyone to leave so she could speak with her client. My father frowned. "We're her family," Abigail said, "and I'm her legal counsel." My mother said, "Surely this can wait." Abigail looked at her. "It already waited while you attended a party." The room went silent. Heather gasped. It was my vow renewal. Abigail turned to her. "I know, the time-stamped photographs are very helpful." My father's face darkened. "Are you threatening us in a hospital room?" "No, Richard, I'm informing you in one." He stepped closer. "You forget who controls the Mercer Trust." Abigail opened her leather folder. "No," she said, "you do." She removed a court-stamped document and placed it on the rolling tray beside my bed. Effective 8:35 this morning. The Mercer Family Protection Trust has been activated under emergency fiduciary provisions. Caroline Mercer is recognized as controlling trustee upon medical stabilization, with temporary authority vested in me as her designated legal agent until she can execute instructions. My mother blinked. "What does that mean?" Heather asked. Abigail looked at my father. "It means Richard no longer has administrative control. Vivian has no spending authority. No disbursements may be made to Heather or Grant. All pending family event reimbursements are denied. All accounts are under review." My father stared at the document. "That's impossible." "It's done." My mother gripped the back of a chair. "Because we didn't come immediately?" "Because you were emergency contacts notified of a critical medical event involving a named beneficiary and chose to remain at a social event, while already under review for attempted misuse of trust funds." The abandonment provision was not subtle. Eleanor wrote it that way intentionally. Heather's face turned red. "You're doing this while Caroline is lying here injured?" Abigail looked at me. I could not smile. I could barely breathe. But my eyes were open. Abigail said, "No, Caroline did this before the accident. Your family simply completed the evidence." If you're still watching, drop a comment below with the words "she knew" if you've ever had to prepare quietly because you already understood who people would become under pressure. Subscribe to Revenge Chronicles if you believe the calmest woman in the room is often the one holding the strongest proof. My recovery took months. The accident left me with a fractured rib, a repaired liver laceration, a concussion, nerve pain in my left hand, and a scar along my hairline that my stylist later learned to hide with soft layers. There were physical therapy appointments, follow-up scans, headaches, nightmares, and mornings when brushing my teeth felt like a legal negotiation with my own body. My parents wanted to visit often after the trust was frozen. That timing was not lost on me. At first, Abigail blocked them. Then, when I could speak again, she asked what I wanted. I said, "Short visits, no trust discussions, no Heather." The first visit happened on July 2nd, at 2 in the afternoon. My parents entered my rehabilitation room carrying a basket of fruit I could not eat and a stack of magazines I did not read. My mother looked smaller. My father looked angry, disguised as tired. For 7 minutes they asked about pain levels, physical therapy, and whether the nurses were attentive. At 2:08 my father said, "Caroline, there has been a misunderstanding with the trust." I pressed the call button. A nurse came in. I said, "They're done." My mother's mouth fell open. The nurse, a broad-shouldered woman named Denise, looked at my parents and said, "Visiting hours are over for you two." My father said, "We're her parents." Denise said, "Then act like it outside." I loved Denise immediately. After that, visits became letters. My mother wrote first. "Caroline, I know you feel we failed you, but you must understand how impossible the situation was. Heather was walking down the aisle in minutes. Guests had flown in. We were told you were in surgery and there was nothing we could do. I thought staying calm was best for everyone." I read the letter twice, then placed it in the evidence folder Abigail kept. My father wrote next. "I made a judgment call. Perhaps it was wrong. But freezing the trust punishes the entire family. Eleanor never intended that." I laughed when Abigail read that line aloud. My grandmother had intended exactly that. Heather sent a voice message. "You've taken this too far. Mom can't sleep. Dad is humiliated. Grant's parents think we stole from the family. Do you know what that feels like?" I listened while sitting in a wheelchair near the rehab garden. Then I deleted it. I did know what humiliation felt like. It felt like waking up and learning your parents chose a champagne toast over a trauma unit. It felt like being treated as indestructible until your injuries became inconvenient evidence. It felt like realizing that people who called you strong had simply found a polite word for abandoned. On July 15th, the trust review hearing was held in a conference room at Abigail's firm because I was still not medically cleared for court. I attended by secure video from the rehabilitation center with Denise hovering nearby, pretending to adjust a blanket. My father appeared with his attorney. My mother sat beside him. Heather and Grant sat behind them, both dressed as if clothing could repair credibility. The trust protector, a retired judge named Malcolm Reed, presided. Abigail presented the attempted disbursement request for Heather's vow renewal. She presented communications showing my father had described the event as a family legacy obligation. She presented invoices from Larkspur House, the florist, the champagne vendor, and the photographer. She presented the emergency call logs from St. Anne's. She presented my mother's text, sent while I was unconscious. She presented Heather's social media posts, time-stamped during my surgery. My father's attorney tried to argue that my parents had reasonably believed medical professionals did not need them present. Judge Reed asked, "Were they told the patient was critical?" The attorney hesitated. "Yes." "Were they told to come immediately?" "Yes." "Did they?" "No." "Why?" The attorney looked down. Abigail said, "Because the vow renewal ceremony was beginning." No one spoke. Judge Reed turned to my father. "Mr. Mercer, did you consider leaving the ceremony?" My father adjusted his cuff. "We were in an impossible position." Judge Reed said, "That was not my question." My father's jaw tightened. "Yes, briefly." "And why did you stay?" My mother began crying softly. My father looked directly at the camera, not at me, but near me. "Heather needed us." There it was, not dressed, not edited, not softened. Heather needed us. I was bleeding in surgery. Heather needed applause. Judge Reed wrote something. Then he asked, "And Caroline?" My father did not answer. That silence became the public payoff. No shouting, no confession dragged from him. Just one question he could not answer, without revealing the family hierarchy. Abigail looked at me through the screen. I gave the smallest nod I could manage. She continued. Under the trust provisions, my father was removed permanently from administrative control. My mother was barred from influence over distributions. Heather and Grant were blocked from receiving any discretionary funds for personal lifestyle, event costs, marital support, or debt relief. An independent fiduciary would manage technical operations, while I retained controlling trustee authority once medically cleared. The $10 million trust was no longer a family purse. It became what my grandmother had intended: protection. My father objected. My mother cried. Heather left the room before the hearing ended. Grant stayed because men like Grant always stay near money until the last door closes. After the hearing, Abigail called me. "It's done," she said. "I was looking out the rehab window at a courtyard fountain. Did he say anything after?" "Your father?" "Yes. He said Eleanor poisoned you against them." I closed my eyes. My grandmother had not poisoned me. She had vaccinated me. There is a difference. When I was discharged in August, I did not return to Savannah immediately. I stayed for 6 weeks in a small rented cottage on Tybee Island, with Melissa rotating in on weekends and a home health nurse visiting during the week. The cottage had pale blue walls, a screened porch, and a view of marsh grass moving in the wind. I walked 5 minutes the first day, 7 the next, 12 by the end of the week. Healing was not graceful. It was slow, repetitive, undignified work. It was learning how to stand without dizziness, learning how to sleep without hearing metal, learning that a body can be grateful and furious at the same time. My mother came once, after asking through Abigail. She arrived at 3 in the afternoon on August 22nd, with no makeup, no pearls, and a paper bag from a bakery I liked as a child. For once, she looked like a woman rather than a role. We sat on the porch. For 10 minutes, she talked about the weather, the drive, the bakery. Then I said, "Mom." She stopped. I looked at her hands twisted in her lap. "Why didn't you come?" Her face crumpled. "I thought you would survive," she whispered. "That isn't an answer. I thought Heather would never forgive me if I ruined the ceremony." "And me?" She stared at the marsh. "You always forgive eventually." The honesty of it landed between us. Not cruelly, not kindly, simply. I nodded. "That version of me died in the accident," I said. She began to cry. Quietly this time. No performance, no tissue pressed dramatically to her mouth. Just a woman looking at the cost of her own assumptions. "I am sorry," she said. I believed she was. I also knew apology could not unmake impact. "I'm not ready to forgive you," I said. She nodded. For once, she did not ask me to make her feel better. My father did not visit. He sent one letter. It said, "I hope someday you understand the pressure I was under." I asked Abigail to file it. Heather sent nothing for months. Then, in October, she emailed me. Subject: "Are you happy now?" The body of the email was 4 sentences. "Grant and I are separating. Dad says the trust won't help me with legal fees. Mom cries every day. You got what you wanted." I replied with 1 sentence. "No, Heather, I got what grandmother wrote." She never responded. By December, I was strong enough to return to work part-time. My first day back, Melissa decorated my office with yellow tulips. Not balloons, because she knew balloons made me feel like hospitals. On my desk was a framed copy of a quote my grandmother had once written in a letter to me. "A woman who prepares is not suspicious, she is awake." I sat down and cried privately for 3 minutes. Then I opened my email. The trust became my responsibility, in a way that felt less like inheritance and more like guardianship. I established clear distribution rules. Medical emergencies would be funded. Education for younger family members would be funded. Housing support in cases of safety or disability would be considered. Vanity events, lifestyle inflation, debt from reckless spending, and reputation management would not. My father called that punitive. I called it stewardship. The first approved distribution under my authority was not for me. It was for my cousin Laurel's son, who needed specialized autism therapy not covered by insurance. The second was for emergency housing for a widowed aunt after a hurricane damaged her roof. The third was for medical travel expenses for a family employee's spouse. Because my grandmother had included long-term household staff in a small beneficiary class, and my father had ignored it for years. When Abigail told me that, I sat quietly for a long time. My grandmother remembered the housekeeper's husband. I said, yes. My father forgot his daughter. Abigail did not soften it. Yes. That is the thing about truth. It does not always comfort. Sometimes it simply stops the bleeding. 1 year after the accident, on June 18th, I drove to the intersection near Beaufort, where the truck had hit me. I brought no flowers. It was not that kind of pilgrimage. I parked safely, stepped out, and stood near the rebuilt traffic light. Cars passed. Life continued with the indifference and mercy of ordinary motion. At 6:28 that evening, the hour my parents had clapped for Heather, I placed one hand over the scar along my rib and breathed in slowly. I thought I would feel anger. Instead, I felt distance. The accident had become a door. A brutal door, but a door. On one side was the family story, where Caroline would survive anything, forgive anything, manage anything, and still show up in a navy dress with a good attitude. On the other side was a quieter life, where I no longer auditioned for care. I chose the quieter life. People like to say, blood is thicker than water. My grandmother hated that phrase. She used to say, blood is only meaningful if it is still connected to a heart. My parents had treated blood as obligation flowing one way, from me to them, from my competence to their comfort, from my silence to Heather's shine. When the ambulance came, that arrangement finally became visible. They could not claim confusion after that. They had received the call, they had understood the words, they had stayed. I do not tell this story because I want you to hate them. Hate is too easy, and it rarely teaches anything useful. My parents were not monsters in the way stories like to draw monsters. They donated to charities. They remembered neighbors, birthdays. My mother sent handwritten thank you notes. My father helped friends find accountants. They were pleasant at dinner parties and generous when generosity could be witnessed. But character is not what you perform when the room is watching. Character is what you choose when leaving costs you applause. They chose applause. My grandmother chose documents. I chose to honor them. If you are listening to this while realizing your family loves your usefulness more than your life, I want you to sit with that truth gently but firmly. Do not rush to excuse it because the truth hurts. Do not bury it because they also had good moments. People can love you in pieces and still fail you in ways that require distance. People can be proud of you and still abandon you. People can say family while treating your needs like interruptions. You are allowed to protect yourself before the crash. You are allowed to change emergency contacts. You are allowed to put legal papers in order. You are allowed to stop being the person everyone assumes will survive neglect. Preparation is not betrayal. Boundaries are not cruelty. Documentation is not drama. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your future self is believe people the first time they show you what they will choose. My parents still live in the house on Ellison Square. My mother writes occasionally. My father sends holiday cards signed with both their names, though I know the handwriting is his assistant's. Heather lives in a townhouse outside Charleston now. Her divorce from Grant became final in April. I hope she finds peace, though I no longer volunteer to purchase it for her. As for me, I still practice law. I still manage the trust. I still wake some nights at 3:40 in the morning, hearing breaks that are not there. When that happens, I sit up, touch the scar near my hairline, and name 5 things in the room. Lamp. Window. Book. Blanket. Door. Always door. Because I have one now. A door I can close. A door I can open. A door no one else controls with guilt, dressed as love. Thank you for staying with this story. Some stories are painful because they ask us to look directly at the moment a family's true priorities become impossible to deny. If Caroline's story reminded you of your own quiet strength, follow and subscribe to Revenge Chronicles for more stories about women who stop begging to be chosen and start protecting the lives they built in silence. So tell me in the comments, if your family abandoned you in your worst emergency, would you ever trust them with access to your life again?